It started with a game.
If everyone would like just bag the noise and play like we could do this.
Sonny, name one thing that's gotten better in the last 10 years.
Shall we play a game?
Video games.
All right, I acknowledge that.
Totally awesome video game!
We're back here with Game Writing 101. This video is about story seeds. It's the first sort of link in the chain here of this process for narrative design. And in it, I want you just to kind of follow along, but I encourage you to come up with your own story seed. I am going to have examples for you. In fact, I'll be working with this hypothetical game throughout the entire course. But I do encourage you to come up with your own if you'd like. And I'll talk more on that in a minute. Let me first show you an example of what I believe is a story seed, and then we'll talk about it here for a minute. So I got to give you a little context for my story seed, and that is I am developing a story, a game story, based around King Midas, and maybe not everybody knows who King Midas is. It is one of the oldest folk tales of sort of, I don't know, what we might call Western mythology, because its origins are Greek. And I'll post a link to this story so that you can see it for yourself, the original story. But the original story is there's this king, King Midas, and I think it's Dionysus, grants him a wish, so he wishes that anything he touches turns to solid gold. And it sounds amazing, of course, right? He gets, kind of crazed with greed. And he's touching all these things, and at first it's great, he's making himself rich by just, touching stuff. And then his daughter, his only daughter, runs up to him and says, Dad, and gives him a hug. And without thinking, he hugs her, and she turns to gold. Really a tragic story, and it has endured because I think it's endured. It's a really good story. It's very simple, and it's clearly, there's a moral there about greed, right? But anyway, that and I will say, I think that there have been some people who think that it's been, like all these folk stories, been added to and changed and revised, and in fact, it may have undergone, the part about hugging his daughter may have even come much, much later. But regardless, it's a great story, the story of King Midas. So what I'm doing here, I give you that context because my story that I'm going to work on is a kind of a sequel, okay? So there's some context. Now I'll show you what I have for a story seed, and I'll talk about why I like it, why I think that it works. Years after accidentally transforming his daughter into a gold statue, an ailing King Midas seizes the power to undo his golden touch. But when a prince of thieves makes off with the statue, Midas is forced to go on a dangerous manhunt through hostile territory, even as the clock winds down on his own mortality. And let me talk about why I like it for what I'm doing here. Okay. I think it explains the high concept pretty well. It is a story about this old man who's, if you know the story of King Midas, he spent his whole life racked with guilt, trying to find a way to cure his daughter, who he has turned into a gold statue ages ago. And he finally gets the chance, and he's at the end of his life. But then, somebody steals the statue because it's gold, and he's got to chase it like all over. The high concept there. Clock's running. He's an old man. He's at the end of his life, and he's clock's running out on his clock's running out on him as he does so. Right. So I find it pretty intriguing and exciting. It's purely a matter of opinion, but this is my story, so I get to decide, right? And if you want to do your own story seed, you get to decide what intrigues and excites you. But it also clearly illustrates the major conflicts among the key figures in the story who are mentioned here. There's a protagonist in King Midas, an antagonist, a Prince of Thieves. The Prince of Thieves wants a statue, presumably because it's made of gold. But for King Midas, that's his daughter, and he's got the cure, but also he's dying. He can't just, sit back and wait and send a message to the thief and offer to buy it for more than its value. He doesn't have time. When he dies, the cure dies with him. I don't know if that part is maybe not as clearly illustrated, but King Midas has the power. Okay, he dies, the power, that cure, and that power is gone. So the stakes are also clear. The stakes are that if he doesn't recapture the statue before he dies, his daughter will never return to her human form, and she'll remain a statue forever. It's brief. At this stage, we want it to be brief for a couple reasons. If you can intrigue and excite and sort of illustrate, the key conflicts and the stakes in one or two sentences, that's probably a good sign that it's a good story. That's going to make an interesting story for other people. That brevity. If you can't boil it down to the one or two sentences and still, have it be as interesting, then maybe it's too complicated, or maybe it's just, something else is wrong with it. And it works well with the type of game we're making. Of course, we're making a game, and that matters, right? That's the medium we're working in. It's interactive. Now, because it's my idea and it's my hypothetical video game, I've already decided that it's going to be a first-person shooter of sorts, a little different than your typical first-person shooter. It's not going to be very violent, but it's going to be, and I do this partly, well, because I think it would be fun, but also for the sake of simplicity of the example. I mean, if you played Half-Life, Half-Life 2, lots of other games where it's a first-person shooter with some, physics-based puzzles and some exploration and a cool story, right? Half-Life and Half-Life 2 and a lot of games like that had, but even like The Last of Us, in my opinion, great action, first-person shooter, but some puzzles and a great story, right? I think so anyway. So that's a story seed. What else is advantageous about doing it this way, about having a story seed? Well, again, I feel like I'm on solid ground. Instead of jumping in to writing like a big, long sort of story treatment where I don't really know, which might be okay, but if I, if I'm in a professional game development atmosphere, every second is precious. So taking this kind of a baby step is really advantageous. It's short. So if I'm working with a group and I pass this around, or I probably more realistically, I'll pass like 6 of these around, and everyone's like, I know, okay, well, this King Midas idea and whatever other ideas I have on the page there aren't cutting it. I haven't spent a ton of time on it. I can toss them out, start again. That's extremely helpful. And it's brief for other people to read and digest. That brevity, it works with you. And you may find yourself someday in the game industry working on projects that need a lot of stories, not just one story that you're going to be working on for 3 years in the context of game development with a team. You may be working on, like a free-to-play game that needs a ton of content and needs lots of stories. I've worked on those, plenty of those actually. Fairly recently worked on a game based on the TV sitcom, CBS sitcom called The Goldbergs, it was really fun. The creator, Adam F. Goldberg, encouraged us to, or Adam, I think it's Adam F. Goldberg, encouraged us to come up with original stories. So we weren't just kind of rehashing what was on the show, but we needed a lot of them. They were brief stories, and we needed more and more content. And it was fun, but we would start with these little story pitches or story seeds, log lines, whatever you want to call them, really. And we do like as many as we could think of, 8, 10, 12, and then pass them around and be like, okay, these 7 are cool. The other 5, I don't know. So doing it this way is very helpful to make sure your first move, your first step is in the right direction. Hopefully that makes sense. I just want to add one more thing. And then to sort of tie that off, works well with the game. I know that I'm making a first-person shooter with some like physics types puzzles and exploration. So I know that my pitch, my story seed, is going to work pretty well for that. He's got to take a physical journey to get to chase this statue all over hell and back. So that's pretty good for the type of game I'm making, right? He's got a clear enemy here in this Prince of Thieves who wants to keep the statue because it's gold. I've worked on games. One of the people who kind of taught me to do story seeds were really, I was working for Telltale Games when they were first getting going. It was the somewhat early days of Telltale. And they were making some cool stuff, but they started making games based on that television show CSI. This was the first CSI, I think Las Vegas. And at the time, that show had like 10 million viewers every week. It was crazy. So Telltale was making games for that TV show. And I think it really was probably helped them a lot because they sold really well. But each game, and I worked on maybe 3 of those games for Telltale, each game had like 3 or 4 different cases, different homicides that you had to solve. So it was like, okay, we'd have to come up with a number of story pitches to make sure we had, enough cool stories. But also, obviously, the story seed had to be, conducive. This story seed I'm showing you wouldn't make any sense really for a modern day, mystery solving game like that, right? I mean, you're always thinking about what kind of game you're making, and it's obviously not just about what kind of story. Right now we're sort of working in a vacuum. You're just using your imagination. You're allowed to do anything you want. You're not working with the team, but it's really important to keep in mind, right? Like obviously, the type of game you want to make is a big influence on your story seed. In my case, first-person shooter, physics puzzles. I think the story seed works well for that. And the last thing I want to touch on just is like a theme, social message, etc. When you go and you read these books about writing that were written by much smarter people and much more accomplished people than myself, you'll get, differing opinions on the importance of a theme, central theme, social message, that kind of thing. If there's a social message that's important to you that you want to prove in your game, it's certainly never too easy to start thinking about it. And it may not show up in the story seed as much, but it may certainly influence your thinking, right? It's never too early. You'll get differing opinions. Stephen King, in his excellent wrote something called Stephen King on Writing. It's part memoir, it's part his kind of philosophy on writing. I remember pretty clearly he says at one point, he talks about theme, and he's like, sometimes you have it there, sometimes you don't. And he says, it's no big deal. That's Stephen King. He's incredibly accomplished at what he does, what he sets out to do. And then you'll read books like I showed you in my reading list. I showed you this Robert McKee story. Theme is just hugely important, right? Everything's written around it. I'll touch on this more in another video because it's a big topic. But I think, it's at this point right now, it's whatever you want to do. If you want to come up with your own at all, is of course is absolutely fine. Maybe you just want to entertain. Maybe you have a social message of one kind or another that's really important, and you don't want it to come off as a sales pitch or a lecture because then people tune out. But you want to prove to people that it's important, and that's great too. It's whatever you want. So homework, right, is optional. You could just follow along with my example, my story seed, and you could say, yeah, okay. Or come up with your own. Just when you finish this video, go and work on your own. I'll have, some notes and things on Google Drive, or you can look at this if you want. Maybe I'll try and find some other examples, but come up with your own. And lastly, if you do come up with your own, I'll give you one those suggestions. So it's whatever you want. But if you want to take it even a step further, if you want to go through this whole course using your story, there's an opportunity for you, when we're done sort of designing this all on paper, there's an opportunity for you to actually make a game out of it. And I'll talk more about that later. But there's a catch, and the catch is, obviously, unless you're like a billionaire, and call me if you are, you probably aren't going to be able to make a first-person shooter on your own dime, or you know what I mean? You're going to need to do this as a text adventure. If you don't know what a text adventure is, Google it. But it's these old games made by Infocom and before graphics, and it was really an interactive story told by text, where you could choose what action to perform within a somewhat limited set of actions, but it was interactive and they were really fun. And what's cool is that there's lots of software out there that'll allow you to create your own text adventure, their own story, your own writing, interactive, and I believe for free. And that's going to be important if you really want to get a job in this industry. You're going to have a portfolio of things to show that you've written. And they don't all have to be interactive, but I feel like you got to have something in there that's interactive for creative directors and narrative directors and people to look at and play and see that, you understand some of an interactive narrative, and you've done some on your own, and that it's fun and reads well. So there's a suggestion. Don't stress it too much. I'll talk about this more later. Decide what game that you would want. Decide what hypothetical game you want to make and do a story seed for it. And I'll see you in the next video. Put your lucky socks on. Fire up the next video. Let's go. We're all about just doing it. Again, this is hands-on, gung-ho, mofo type stuff. I'll see you soon.